They fired me at 4:20 p.m. on a Tuesday. 6 minutes, one cardboard box, and a signature that's all they thought they needed to erase me from the empire I built. My name is Madeline Carter. I was 39 years old and, until precisely 4:20 p.m. that day, the chief engineering architect at Nexura Systems. For 7 years, I had designed the security protocols that allowed AI medical systems to operate across borders, across languages, across regulatory frameworks that were never designed to talk to each other. I remember the weight of the box they gave me, empty except for a company handbook. Ironic. They expected me to fill it with personal items, but after 7 years, I had nothing personal left at Nexura. Everything I valued was embedded in the code, in the architecture, in the protocols that kept the system alive, the things they couldn't put in a box. Oliver didn't even look at me when he slid the termination papers across his desk. Oliver Drexler, CEO, former co-founder, former friend. We had started in a cramped co-working space in Denver, huddled around a single whiteboard, dreaming of building systems that could save lives. Now he sat behind a desk worth more than my first car, his eyes fixed on his tablet. "This is effective immediately," he said, still not looking up. "HR will escort you to collect any personal items. Your access has already been revoked." I didn't react, didn't cry, didn't scream. I simply nodded, signed where indicated, and stood up. 7 years of building, designing, redesigning, fighting for safety protocols, for fail-safes, for human oversight, all ended with a swipe of a pen. No questions. He finally looked up, perhaps disappointed by my lack of drama. "No," I replied. "I think I understand perfectly." And I did. I understood more than he could possibly know. The first warning signs had appeared 8 months earlier. I had just completed the final architecture for what we called the Sentinel licensing grid, a complex web of protocols that controlled how our AI diagnostic systems could be licensed and implemented across 34 countries. It was a masterpiece of regulatory compliance, a digital Rosetta Stone that translated between incompatible legal frameworks. The day after I submitted the final documentation, a new face appeared in our executive leadership meeting. Lauren Sparks, introduced as our next-generation architectural visionary. She was younger, louder, more willing to promise impossible timelines to impatient investors. I watched as she flipped through my documentation during that first meeting, nodding as though she understood systems that had taken me years to develop. After the meeting, Oliver pulled me aside. "Madeline, we're promoting you," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Strategic oversight consultant, you'll be advising the board directly." It sounded impressive. It was anything but. Within a week, my direct reports were reassigned. Within a month, my access to core development environments was temporarily suspended. Within 3 months, I was invited to fewer meetings, copied on fewer emails. I was being erased. One permission at a time. I might have accepted it as the natural evolution of a company that had grown from a scrappy startup to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Except for what happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, when Lena from the legal department asked to meet me for coffee. Lena had been with us almost from the beginning. She had drafted our first contracts, had fought alongside me for ethical guardrails. Now she looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as she slid a tablet across the table. "They're changing the IP control clauses," she whispered. "Global licensing control is being transferred." I scanned the document, my stomach tightening. They were attempting to remove my name from the core architecture patents. Patents that bore my digital signature on every page. Patents that carried my DNA in every line of code. "Can they do this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. With enough lawyers, enough money, enough time. Yes, they could. "They're trying," Lena replied. "I thought you should know." I thanked her, knowing this conversation had likely put her job at risk. As I walked back to the office through the rain, something crystallized in my mind. A memory of something I had built into the system years ago. Something no one had ever questioned, because no one had ever read the full specifications. Clause 29b of the International Licensing Protocol. All global implementation changes require authentication from the original architectural signatory. It was a security feature I had insisted on, designed to prevent hostile takeovers of the system. One line in thousands of pages of documentation. One line that still carried my name. That night, I accessed the system remotely. Not through Nexora's main development environment, they had revoked that access weeks ago, but through a separate interface I had created for emergency protocol adjustments. An interface that still recognized my biometric signature. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't plant viruses or delete code. I simply created a ghost update, a verification package that seemed to contain routine security improvements but actually reinforced the original authentication requirements. Then I pushed it through to our international regulatory partners. Over the next 5 months, I watched as I was systematically sidelined. Lauren took credit for my work, presenting my designs as her innovations. Oliver nodded approvingly in meetings where she stumbled through explanations of systems she barely understood. I sat silently, taking notes, watching my legacy being rewritten in real time. Until that Tuesday at 4:20 p.m., when they finally decided they no longer needed even the appearance of my involvement. As the security guard escorted me to the lobby, I felt strangely calm. 7 years of my life, my work, my innovation all seemingly erased in 6 minutes. But they had missed something crucial. My name was still on the patent. My authentication was still required for global licensing. And they had just removed my last reason to care about Nexora's success. I went home to my apartment, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and watched the sunset from my balcony. For the first time in years, I had no meetings scheduled, no crisis calls to join, no middle-of-the-night debugging sessions. Just silence and the changing colors of the sky. At precisely 9:00 p.m., I opened my personal laptop and entered a single command line. Then I pressed my thumb against the fingerprint reader and spoke a passphrase into the microphone. Simple, elegant, irreversible. I didn't freeze everything. That would have been cruel, potentially dangerous for patients relying on the systems. Instead, I froze the licensing verification, the mechanism that allowed Nexora to collect payments, to expand to new facilities, to sign new contracts. The core medical functions would continue, but Nexora's ability to grow to profit would stop cold. I closed my laptop and went to bed. 7 years of 80-hour weeks had left me exhausted, and I slept better that night than I had in months. The first calls came at 6:17 a.m. I didn't answer. By noon, my voicemail was full. By evening, reporters were messaging me on every platform. I silenced my phone and ordered takeout. It took them 3 days to figure out what had happened, 3 days in which Nexora's stock dropped 34%, in which partners in Japan, France, and Brazil reported mysterious licensing failures, in which Oliver held emergency board meetings trying to explain why their billion-dollar licensing system was suddenly non-functional. On the 4th day, a courier delivered a letter offering me reinstatement with enhanced compensation and title. I didn't respond. On the 5th day, the letter came from Oliver, directly a handwritten note begging for a meeting. I didn't respond. On the 6th day, their lawyers contacted mine, threatening lawsuits for corporate sabotage. My lawyer, a woman I'd met during our first regulatory battle in the EU, simply responded, Ms. Carter implemented approved security protocols as documented in licensing agreements signed by Nexora Systems. She remains willing to authenticate legitimate licensing requests that meet ethical implementation standards as outlined in those same agreements. It wasn't sabotage. It was the system working exactly as designed, exactly as documented if anyone had bothered to read the documentation. By the 2nd week, the story had leaked to the tech press. Nexora Systems in freefall after architectural patent dispute. The headlines didn't mention me by name, but they didn't need to. Everyone in the industry knew whose architecture Nexora's systems were built on. I spent that time planning, meeting with former colleagues who had been similarly sidelined or discarded. A security engineer who had been called too cautious. A compliance officer who had been downsized. A UX designer who had insisted on human-centered fail-safes. the people whose caution and ethics had been treated as obstacles to growth. We met in coffee shops, in parks, eventually in a small office I rented in Boulder. We talked about what had gone wrong at Nixora, but more importantly, about what could go right in a system built from the ground up with ethical controls and creator rights at its core. After a month, I finally answered one of Oliver's calls. Madeline. His voice sounded thin, desperate. What do you want? Money, your job back, a board seat? Name it. I want what I always wanted, Oliver. Systems that can't be weaponized, that can't be abused, that keep humans in the loop. Systems where the people who build them have a say in how they're used. That's not practical in today's market. It's the only thing that's practical, I cut him off. Because without it, you're sitting on $2.6 billion worth of useless patents. How's the board feeling about that? He was silent for a long moment. What are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything. I'm building something new. When it's ready, you'll see the difference. I hung up and turned back to my small team. On the whiteboard behind them, the first sketches of Graybridge licensing were taking shape. Not just a company, but a new framework for creator rights in AI. A system with emergency stops, with creator veto power, with human verification checkpoints. 3 months after my firing, an internal Nixora memo leaked. Just an old architect. Anyone can be replaced. It was Oliver's assessment of me, written the day before they removed my access. The tech press had a field day. Investors demanded investigations. Partners began publicly questioning Nixora's stability. 6 months after my firing, Oliver was suspended pending an internal investigation. Lauren Sparks gave a disastrous interview in which she couldn't explain basic functions of the system she supposedly designed. Nixora's stock fell another 40%. 1 year after my firing, I stood on a stage in Vienna, signing the first international AI creator rights accord. Graybridge wasn't just a company. It was now the framework being adopted by regulatory bodies in 22 countries. Beside me stood my team. No longer discarded talents, but recognized pioneers in ethical AI governance. Reporters shouted questions about Nixora, about Oliver, about revenge. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I gestured to the document we had just signed. Some foundations can't be replaced, I said into the microphone, because they were never meant to be sold. I didn't need to say more. The system I'd built spoke for itself, both the one I'd designed at Nixora, now frozen in a state of suspended animation, and the new one taking shape at Graybridge, not built on sabotage or revenge, but on the principle that creation carries responsibility, that those who build systems should have a say in how they're used. 2 years before my firing, I had stood in Oliver's office, arguing for the clause that would eventually freeze Nixora's empire. He had barely looked up from his phone. Just put whatever you need in there, he'd said dismissively. No one reads the fine print anyway. He was right. No one had read it. No one except me. The day after the Vienna signing, I received one final email from Oliver. No text, just an attachment, a photo from our first office. 2 people smiling in front of a whiteboard covered in diagrams. A vision of technology that could heal, that could connect, that could protect. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The systems we build speak for us, in their architecture, in their limits, in their values. Mine had spoken clearly. Some things can't be taken with a box and a 6-minute meeting. Some things remain in the foundation, invisible until you try to remove them. 3 years after my firing, Graybridge licensing became the standard for medical AI implementation across 38 countries. Our core principle that creators maintain ethical oversight of their systems had become regulatory requirement in the EU, Japan, and Brazil. The emergency stop protocols I had designed were now mandatory for all critical AI systems. Nixora still existed, but as a shadow of its former self, they had eventually hired enough lawyers and engineers to work around my authentication requirements. But by then, the market had moved on. Their reputation for cutting corners, for discarding expertise, for prioritizing growth over safety had become too well known. I never spoke publicly about what happened, never gave interviews about the freeze, about the code that brought a $1 billion company to its knees. I didn't need to. The code spoke for itself in regulatory filings, in authentication logs, in licensing agreements that still carried my digital signature. Some nights, I still dream about that Tuesday afternoon. The weight of the empty box, the silence as I was escorted out, the certainty that I had been erased. Then I wake up and remember you can't erase what's built into the foundation. You can only build on top of it, hoping the ground beneath you holds. 5 years after my firing, I received an invitation to speak at a technical conference in Denver. The venue was familiar, the same co-working space where Nixora had begun. Now renovated, expanded, but still with the same exposed brick walls where we had once pinned our first system diagrams. I stood at the podium and looked out at a room full of young engineers, designers, architects of systems not yet built. They weren't there to hear about Nixora, or Graybridge, or licensing disputes. They were there to learn about designing systems that couldn't be weaponized against their creators or their users. The most important line of code you'll ever write, I told them, is the one that answers the question: who does this system serve, who controls it, who can stop it? After the talk, a young woman approached me, clutching a tablet with familiar diagrams on the screen. "I'm studying your authentication protocols," she said. "The ones from Sentinel. The way you embedded creator rights into the core architecture, it's brilliant." I smiled, recognizing in her the same intensity I'd once brought to those problems. "Just make sure to document it clearly," I said. "And make sure your name is on it." She nodded seriously. "Oh, I will. After what happened at Nixora, everyone makes sure their name is on their work now." I laughed. Perhaps that was my legacy, not just the systems I had built, but a generation of creators who understood their value, who insisted on recognition, who built their names into their foundations. That night, I walked past Nixora's former headquarters, now occupied by a different company. The signage had changed, the lobby had been remodeled, but I knew the foundations remained the same. The electrical systems, the support beams, the basic architecture unchanged despite the new facade, just like the code I had written, still running somewhere beneath the surface of new interfaces, just like Clause 29B, still embedded in regulatory frameworks around the world, just like my name, still attached to the patents that had built an empire. They had fired me at 4:20 p.m. on a Tuesday, thinking 6 minutes was enough to erase 7 years. They were wrong. Some things can't be erased with a signature and an empty box. Some things remain in the foundation, in the architecture, in the code that keeps the system alive. My name is Madeline Carter. I built systems that crossed borders, that saved lives, that connected incompatible frameworks. And when they tried to remove me from my creation, I reminded them of a simple truth: the architect's name may be just a signature on paper, but her vision is embedded in every line of code, in every protocol, in every authentication check. You can fire the architect, but you can't remove her from the foundation. 7 years after my firing, I rarely think about Nixora anymore. Graybridge has expanded beyond licensing into comprehensive AI governance frameworks. Our creator rights protocols have been adopted in 42 countries. The team that began in that small Boulder office now occupies 3 floors of a building with a view of the mountains. Sometimes new employees ask about the Nixora story. They've heard rumors, read articles, seen the case studies now taught in business ethics classes. I never elaborate. The past is built into the foundation of what we do. It doesn't need to be revisited. Last month, I received a message from Lena, the lawyer who had warned me years ago. She's a partner at a major firm now, specializing in AI creator rights. "Remember when this wasn't even a field?" her message read. Attached was a photo of a regulatory filing the original Clause 29B language, now expanded into a full section of international AI governance standards. I saved the photo but didn't reply immediately. Some communications don't need words. Some achievements speak for themselves. This morning, I approved the final specifications for Graybridge's next-generation verification system. In the comments section of the documentation, I added one line: "The foundation remembers the architect." not a kill switch or a freeze protocol. Graybridge doesn't need those, just a reminder, embedded in the code, that systems carry the values of their creators. Because that's the lesson I learned from those 6 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon. They thought they were removing a person. But they were really revealing a principle. That creation carries authority. That architecture outlasts employment. That systems remember their foundations, even when companies try to forget. They fired me while my name was still on the patent. They thought it was just a signature on paper, just a legal formality. They didn't understand it was the key to the entire system. They didn't understand that my name wasn't just on the patent, it was in the protocols, in the architecture, in the very foundation of what they had built their empire upon. Some foundations can't be replaced. Some architectures can't be rewritten. Some names can't be erased because they were never meant to be sold. My name is Madeline Carter. I froze licensing in 38 countries with a single command and my fingerprint. Not out of revenge, but out of principle. Because systems should serve their purpose, not just their owners. Because architecture matters. Because foundations remember. And because, sometimes, 6 minutes isn't enough to erase 7 years.